doing what you mean to do and wanting what you want to want is so fucking hard to do and so rare because we're built to conform.
I think one of my life goals, and I can summarize it in a question, but is to be fearless. And it's, equal opposite, courage is another word. But I love this question, which is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I love thinking about that when I'm thinking about big life decisions. Like, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And it's usually like the big one, the bigger thing that I really want to do, but I'm afraid to do it. It's like, that's what I should do. Like, what would I do if I weren't afraid? And what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? And the idea that I will never wish for fewer epic stories at the end of my life. And I've never regretted failures. I've always regretted things that I didn't try. And so just along those lines of trying to create more bias internally towards action rather than inaction, and normalizing consequences of failure as we said earlier, win or learn. And I think that little frame, believe it or not, for anyone who's like on the teetering edge of like, what should I do that thing? When I was debating quitting my job, which is still the hardest decision I've made to this day, still of the many that I've made, was I figured that if I didn't make the entrepreneurship thing work, I would have a hell of a story for business school. And that was actually like the reasoned argument that I gave myself for being willing to quit, was that I think that with my experience, I'll still be able to get a job and I'll have a really cool story of entrepreneurship that I could use to apply to get into business school and then eventually get a job later. And so most times we catastrophize any failure to death, right? Which is like, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna lose all my money, I'm gonna be homeless, no one's gonna talk to me, and I'm gonna die. Playing out the fear, Layla says this, and I love it, but that fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. And so it looks like this ocean that you're gonna step into and drown. But as soon as you step into it, you realize it was not that deep at all, and you can keep walking through it. And I just love that visual, because a lot of times when it's like we have this anxiety around this big decision we have to make, if you actually take the step and realize that it's not death, you're not going to drown immediately. There's plenty of other steps you can take from there, even if you get a little wet.
But I always had this fear in the back of my mind that I might secretly be a coward. And it wasn't a very difficult 1-rep max. It wasn't a really hard CrossFit workout. It was something outside of his control. And he used this term that I love, and he said, I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door. And I always wondered what would happen if I had to really, really wrangle everything, if the whole world came crashing down on me. And I wanted to work out whether or not I was a coward. And he said, thankfully, he kicked the door in and came through.
I think that a lot of the personal excellence comes down to making the "but I'll know" more important than the "but what will everyone else think?" Because I think the true test of whether you're a quote perfectionist or not is if everyone else in the room says it's exceptional, and then you say, "But I'll know it's not because I don't think it's exceptional yet." If you still break what everyone else believes is beautiful so that you can make it the way you want it to be, I think that is probably like the truest test of whether or not you really do value your own opinion over those of other people's. And if you really want to be true to quote the art, whatever your art is, art, I'm using it as a generic term. It could be the career or even like the financial projections that you're supposed to do at your company. Like, there is a way you could do it and do it absolutely fucking excellent. And there's a way you could do it that you could phone it in and probably not get in trouble. But the thing is that you'd know, and then you'd be the type of person who always phones it in. And that to me is disgusting. And that would make me disgusted with me. And that is the thing that would make me want to peel my skin off, because I would hate me. And I think that's why so many people do hate them, because they do settle and they do make these things and they do know and still ignore it. And so they ignore the man in the other room who's clearing his throat, and they shut the door and they lock it and they never let that guy in. And so they look like everyone else, they act like everyone else, and they get what everyone else gets.
America was built on the backs of men who smoked cigarettes, drove without seatbelts, and had bacon for breakfast. If you miss your biohacking routine this morning, you're going to be okay. There's a time for leverage, but there's also a time for violence, which is just brute force. People get really obsessed with optimal, which is getting the most bang for your buck. But there's also maximizing, which is just getting the most bucks. You lose more life trying to optimize everything than just living it. The stress of trying to be perfect is killing you more quickly than your imperfections.
I think that's an ode to being willing to take huge amounts of imperfect action towards one goal, and being willing to sacrifice other things for an extended period of time, despite the fact that other people will say they're making a sacrifice. Like when we enter seasons, I call it, the season of no, which is where I have an extended duration where I say no to almost everything. And most people say that's unbalanced. And they hurl that as though it's a bad thing. They're like, that's so unbalanced. And you're like, yes, that's the point. Because if I had a balanced outcome, then I won't have the outsized return on this one thing. And so, again, like there's so many of these little insults that people will throw at you, like you're unbalanced, you changed, that they intend as insults. But if you actually don't take your society programmed response and say, oh, they mean to insult me. But if you actually think about what they're saying something that's true. And then we just need to be okay with that truth because that was the choice we made to begin with. And so I think about that a lot, which is like, how many things do people tell me that they intend to insult me with that I can take as a compliment? It happened so recently. So yeah, we're walking in the street. Someone bumps into her. She comes back to me and she was like, guess what this guy just said? And I was like, what? And she was like, he called me a skinny bitch. And I was like, what? But she seemed so happy. And I was like, I just kind of shook my head, like, tell me more, like, explain. And she was like, he said I was skinny. This is the perfect example of him hurling an insult and her choosing not to be insulted.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
No, but really.
Yeah. Do you really mean it? Yeah. I wonder how many times we've been insulted, even in my younger days where someone said something to me that, like, if I had my current brain, I could have been like, you really mean it? Thanks, man. And, yeah, like so unbalanced. I remember I took that as such an insult for such a long period of time. Now, part of that was because when I was being brought up, balance was like one of the big frames of my household. Was like, you have to be balanced, which really just meant you have to be awesome at everything. But balance was the word. So being unbalanced was a term that was used as an insult. And so for so many years, I wanted to be balanced. But then I was like, well, nothing great was ever achieved by people who tried to be great at all things. And so I was like, okay, I'm just not gonna. I might not have a great relationship for a long period of time. There was, like, a lot of people don't know this, but in the early days of our relationship, even when we were married, I told Liz, so the first 3 years, I said the business comes before our marriage. So a lot of people don't know that. And I was like, well, to me, it made sense. It was like, most people break up over money. The business makes money, so the business feeds us, and then we will be okay. And that was kind of my thinking around it. And we eventually flipped that and said, like, if we're good, the business will be fine.